Joanna Johnson is a historical fiction author and former fourth grade teacher with a passion for storytelling that bridges generations. For her first book, Where We Can Be Free, Joanna drew inspiration from actual escapes of families during World War II. Where We Can Be Free is a story that takes you to the forefront of the war in Estonia, Finland, and Sweden. These are locations whose stories and experiences need to be remembered as brave men and women resisted the Russian assault, and refugees crowded into fishing boats, leaving behind their homes, families, and lives for a chance at freedom. Joanna, welcome to Triumph Talks. I am so excited to talk with you today about your new book.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure to work with you, and I'm excited for you to be able to share some really important history, of course, couched in historical fiction context. But let me just begin with the first question, and that is, what inspired you to write this book?
I've always loved historical fiction. It's always been something that I was drawn to. I just love that you got that story and you got that connection to the characters, but it was set in a real life, things that really happened, which I really loved. And I read more and more. I really was drawn to World War II. I loved learning about the different countries that were affected. It started off probably with the Holocaust. I read a lot about the Holocaust, but I also started reading other things about just other countries, what other countries experienced that we didn't hear about quite as often. At the time when I started the book, I was reading a series about, it was actually set in Jerusalem in World War II, and talked about what the Jewish people at that time went through in Jerusalem, which was just really interesting and fascinating just to hear their story. And my husband had relatives in Estonia, so I started to wonder, what went on there as well. And as I started to research, and I found out that 70 to 80,000 Estonians escaped from Estonia during the late summer to early fall of 1944. There were a lot of people who escaped either to Sweden, Finland, some to Germany as well, most by boat. A few went by train to Germany.
Interesting.
So as I learned how many people were affected, and it just kind of became what I wanted to write about, that I wanted to tell their story, because it's not a country that most people have heard of. I had never heard of it before my husband told me that he had, distant relatives there. It's not a country that a lot of people know about, but just wondering, what was going on that many people left the country at that time.
World War II, of course, is a period of history that many people are interested in for good reason. And I have to admit, I've been one of those people that's read a lot of books, and I love the movies that are made, especially the ones that are based on true stories. And until I came across your book, I had never even considered some of those Baltic countries and what they went through. We know a little bit about Finland and Sweden because the Nazi occupation, but you really did allow the world to receive some important history that had been buried, I think. And yet, look at the numbers. We talk about the boat people escaping from Cambodia, and we think of it. When I think of escaping by boat, I automatically think about that. And that was a lot, 70 to 80,000. Your story really does bring you to that experience. In other words, I don't want to give away too much, but I think it's good to know that we're getting to know a family, kind of a family, a large family, different mothers and fathers and husbands and wives and their interaction. And you actually do let us see what it would be like for them to get to that point where they finally are loading on a boat, and the trials and the struggles just getting a small fishing boat across that part of the ocean. It's really amazing to me, the storytelling and the details that you have. I'm curious about your research, because it seems that you really did tap into a lot of true stories that inspired you. Is that right?
Yeah, there were there's not a lot, but there were quite a few just stories about people coming across, and just because there was so many families
Yeah, it makes sense that there would be those personal records that you could draw from out there in the world from those that went through it. And I think that's what's so important for all of us is I'm a very strong proponent of preserving our stories. That's something that I think people need to do. And even though it's historical fiction, I think it really is an example of the outcome that different people, even if someone researches your life, you don't necessarily need to know the person or be related to the person for their story to inspire and provide the details and kind of the context to tell a story like you did, which is it's very moving. Of course, your story is also that of the resistance that happened in Estonia before they finally got to the point where they were decided to leave it. And that's another really amazing feat, I think, of people who took the extreme danger of standing against such a powerful invasion. And there's a lot of really fun details as far as how they were able to keep it secret and the ways that they were able to carry on the operations and things that they did. And of course, the efforts on the other side to try to ferret them out and figure out who they are and where they are. And so there's a lot of suspense in your book. I'll just say that.
And that's one of the things as I did research was that I wanted to include that, even though a lot of the refugees who left probably were not part of any resistance.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to include that in there as, a testament to those Estonians who did resist and who tried their best to regain their freedom.
Yeah, I'm glad that you did that. And it really does make for an amazing story. At the beginning of your book, I know you added a picture of Estonia, which is really helpful because a lot of people don't even know where it is. And so
Right.
we can see where it sits next to Sweden and Finland and get an idea of how that moved. The other thing is you provide a really good description of the country. So it's nice at the beginning to be able to learn about that. And then at the end of the book, you also included, I thought this was brilliant, kind of a cast of characters, because there are a lot of people in the book and a lot of different storylines.
And it's, a lot of the names I tried to make them authentic Estonian names. And so because they're not names that you would normally see,
it does help. I love that part of it. So let me move to the next question for you. And that is, what do you hope that people will take from reading your book?
We live in a really self-absorbed just society. I think a lot of people focus on themselves more than maybe they did in the past. And I think that by learning about things that people went through, to have these characters who were strong and who were fighting against something, and for something that maybe we take for granted a little bit, that we have freedom to do the things that we want to do, whereas that was something that they wanted and that they fought for. And I think one of the things I would want them to take away is, one, to have compassion for people. I think about these people who left their country. They probably never saw their families again that stayed in Estonia. I think that they went to a country that, a lot of them at least, Sweden and Finland, they didn't know the language. They went and they were just thrust in this new environment that they didn't even speak the language. And just to have compassion for people that maybe are different, or who just to love and to admire, to have admiration for those who came before us, who really did pave the way for future generations.
Yeah, that's so important. I think that gratitude definitely changes our perspectives, and I think it makes us a better people, obviously, to be grateful for the sacrifices of the past. And sadly, I think we do lose sight of that. And unless we teach it to our children, they definitely won't know it.
And I think that's what the characters in the book wanted. It wasn't even necessarily freedom for themselves, although that's what they wanted, but they wanted a better life for their children.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they did it, was to provide that life that they wanted and for their children to have as well.
So I know when we were working on publishing your book and the manuscript, you had kind of this epilogue that wrapped up what happened to them. And then you shifted towards setting it up for a second book, rather than just kind of giving this rundown of everything that happened,
Right.
which I'm so glad that you did that, because there's just so much that went into the buildup of reaching that point that they are at the end of your book. And it definitely is, I don't know if cliffhanger is the right word. Maybe it is, in a sense, because you're so curious to know. We don't see the rest of their life. We just see them kind of I'll just say this, who does and doesn't maybe reach that final destination. So I didn't prepare you for this question, but if you don't mind, do you want to talk just a little bit about what your plans are as far as a second book and maybe what people can watch for?
I think I would like to, make another book as to, what happened next in their life as they pursued their freedom, what it was like. I don't want to give away the ending either, but at the same time, just what happened to them and their family, because that's what I'm hoping that I really connected to my characters as I wrote them, and I'm hoping that my readers do that as well. And I know that when I have read books and I want to know what happened to them later, like, I think that's important because the story keeps going. It continues on with what their next chapter is, I guess.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, you did a wonderful job of helping us to connect with the characters and care about them. And that's why at the end, I think there is that sort of sense of what's next? There's just so much ahead of them. And there's so many issues that they had. It kind of separated some of them in the process of escaping. And do they come together? Or, there's just so much story left, and you have a very healthy book. It's quite long, and that's wonderful because you allow us to learn so much about their lives and the process of just moving into that war, pre-war, during the war, resistance, and and then finally escaping. And so I'm really excited about your next book. I don't know if you have a title for it yet.
I do not
yet. Okay, that's fine. Well, at least we'll know to watch for it. I think that's really great. So speaking of titles, that's my next question, is just how did you come up with the title and the cover of your book?
For the cover, my brother-in-law went to Estonia several years back. And he took lots of pictures. He's a really good photographer, but this one really stood out. And it's the picture that is on the cover. It was one that he gave to his parents and that they had in their house. And so, I don't know, with the boat, and that's because of that's how most of the people escaped. I just thought it was very fitting. And just that it was in Estonia as well. I just loved that it was authentic.
That. So that was a custom picture. I mean, by custom, it's not like you went and searched for images on a photo stock site for something from Estonia by the seashore. That's really neat. And it's a gorgeous picture. The colors are so beautiful. It really set up the opportunity to have a striking book. And that boat is it's just kind of sitting there like it was pulled up and left for a while, which I think that helps to suggest that this is a story from the past, but we still have the whispering of its existence today, even in just a boat sitting there. I love the imagery of that.
Yeah.
Very beautiful.
And as far as the title goes, titles are really hard for me. When you asked, do I have a title for the next one? I write it first, like I wrote it. And I thought for a long time, it's been sitting for 20 years and I did not title it for that whole time. It's something that I had thought about a lot in those 20 years, what to title it, but it stumped me. And there was just so much there, just capturing the whole idea. And for a title, you want something that's going to draw people to it. And I remember I had been thinking about it a lot because I knew if I publish this book, I have to have a title. And so I was just lying in bed one night and just thinking over all the things about the book. And then I just had a thought, what is really the most important thing in the book? And I think that was that they were looking for freedom. And the title just popped into my head, where we can be free. And I grabbed my phone and wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it in the morning. But I think it really captures, what they were looking for.
Yeah. It really is the main theme of all of it. And underneath the theme of where we can be free come all the sacrifices and the dangers and the risks that we take, because freedom is so important and so valuable. So I love that. And I love the way that the title is featured on your cover too, with that emphasis on the word free. And even the font, I think I love the visual of just, it's almost like a flowing font versus something chunky and stiff, because I think freedom is just something that flows through life. When it's there, life is just, it's easier and happier and more joyful. Freedom is really important, and we need to be careful not to trade comfort for freedom, because really freedom is where we will find the greatest comforts of the world. You got to be able to make choices. And so such a great topic. And I think that it's an important book for what it conveys. Yeah, love that. Love the title. Of course, you have a subtitle.
One family's escape from Estonia during World War II. We added that just so people would get a little bit of an idea of what it was about.
Yeah, I think that's so important. That was really brilliant to put that piece in. And that way it's like, oh, okay. Because I mean, freedom could be applicable to so many different wars and situations. So it's nice to have that. And that's what's nice too. I think titles, you can have a real short, provocative title, and then the subtitle is what serves as the way to help people understand where it's going, so they know a little bit what to expect. That really is a great segue into my last question, which is what advice you have for aspiring authors. So maybe you can just share some of your processes and the fact that you contributed 20 years of your life to doing the research and writing this book. So I'd love to know what your advice is for other authors who want to maybe write a historical fiction or something similar.
I think the most important thing is to pick something that you are really passionate about, that you really love, just to make it something that you care about. What I did was I got a broad view of where I wanted it to begin and where I wanted it to end. And then I went through and made a timeline of, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, kind of put those things in so that as I started writing it just kind of a chapter at a time. But I had that timeline to guide me because I knew where I wanted it to end. And so I think that's important, just making sure that you have that worked out in your mind. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you can change that along the way if something pops up that you're like, maybe this can happen. It did take me 20 years, but it only took me really less than a year to write it. The rest of the time, I thought about it. I went to edit it several times, but I wrote it a long time before. So I think one is just to be brave and just put it out there. Because I think that's one thing that was holding me back is, writing is such a personal thing, at least for me. Writing is how I express myself. And that can be a very personal thing.
Yeah.
And so I think just having the courage to put it out there and not be afraid of what people will think, because really it doesn't matter. You just do the best you can and just, share it with the world. Because I think it's important for people to understand other people. And I think writing is a way to do that, to kind of connect to others.
Absolutely. Now that we have technology to make video like this and it can be saved and preserved. But prior to technology, writing was the only way really to communicate with future generations. And that's very powerful. I think it's Aristotle that called it one of the greatest inventions of mankind, is the ability to write our ideas and share it with generations to come. I can see what you're saying as far as it's so lasting in that sense. And, sometimes we can be a little self-conscious if we did it well enough, and that can hold people back from actually letting it go out into the world. So I'm glad that you overcame that. So you only took a year to write it. Was that year of writing early on, and then you spent 20 years going back and editing, or how long did you spend researching, I guess? And was it periodic research, or was it mostly before the writing? I'm just really curious about the historical fiction writing process.
So it was mostly before. Okay. I did a lot of research. I mean, it was a long time ago, but we had the internet. There's probably a lot more information now than there was when I researched. I did the research. I had just we had lost twins. And so 4 months after I lost them, I found out I was pregnant with my son. So even before I knew I was pregnant, I think I was starting that research process because I knew I wanted to do it. It was very healing to kind of direct my thoughts and my time to something else rather than focusing on the grief.
I'm really glad that you shared that, because that's also something that I think is so important. I'm trying to share more and more, which is the truth that writing can be so healing. And it doesn't even have to be necessarily writing your story, which is what, I encourage people to do a lot, but it can be writing an important story. In your case, you wrote about something else than what you were going through, but it allowed you to get through that time. That's really a great thing to be sharing.
So that's when I kind of started the process. And when I became pregnant with my son, I knew I had 9 months to finish, because I knew once he came, I probably wouldn't have a whole lot of time. And so at that point, I, continued to research and just made my timeline. I kind of made it a point every day to kind of try to write a chapter. Didn't always happen, but I had the time. I wasn't working. I had stopped working before I had lost the twins. I had been teaching up to that point.
So life kind of gave you this window that maybe you wouldn't have wanted, if you'd known it was coming, but it was actually a very opportune time to really focus. That's interesting. So it was very much a focused, almost life retreat, in that you weren't working, so you were able to make the book your priority.
It was.
Yeah.
And so
I can see where that would be necessary for a book like that, as long as it was as much research and information as you wove into the story. Your timeline, I'm curious, how did you create that? Did you just have like a poster board or something that you itemized it, or did you use sticky notes, or just kind of what was your process?
I think I just kind of drew one on a piece of paper. I knew, kind of where I wanted to start. A lot of the books that I really loved had a prologue that kind of set up the story in a way that was kind of in the future. And so I had that where, the Treaty of Tartu was one of the first times when they had that hope for freedom. I mean, Estonia was a country that had been occupied most of the existence of it because of where it was located on the Baltic Sea. They were always, and because it was such a small country, it was easier for people to take them over. So they were occupied a lot. And that at that time, it was in the 1920, I think it was 1920, was when the Tartu. So I made that as part of, Nina's mom, kind of reflecting on that, since Nina, the main character, she was a baby at the time. And so just having that, and then kind of laying out their life events, I knew that the ending, of course, would be their escape. And so I knew what time that would be in the, late summer to late autumn, or early autumn of 1944 is when, the big mass of 70 to 80,000 people had left. So I knew that was then, and just kind of, put in life events that would have been at that time, and at the same time putting major events that happened during the war in Estonia at that time. Any major like bombings or things like that, kind of where Erna and the Forest Brethren came in, when those times would have been, and kind of put that in to the basic timeline, and then kind of lined it up with maybe what life events were happening with the characters at that time.
I love that. And that makes so much sense. So just kind of getting the actual historical chronology of events, and then work it into the individual lives of your characters. I'm really glad that you mentioned the Treaty of Tartu, because you released your book on February 2nd, which is the anniversary of that treaty. It was kind of one of those, I like to call them divine coincidences, because as we were getting closer to finishing the publishing process, we were looking ahead to say, well, what date should we release it on?
And it was in the prologue that was what was happening at that time when the story started.
So your book was released on the anniversary of the Treaty of Tartu, and it went to #1 as a new release on Amazon, which was really neat as well. I'm really proud of you for achieving that accomplishment. It's definitely worthy of it. Those are the questions that I have for you. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add or share with your viewers?
Just going back to the freedom, we forget how important that is. We live in a country that has freedoms, but I think at times, anything can happen where those freedoms could be taken away. That's one of the important things about history and the importance of understanding what happened in the past, even though sometimes they're not good things or they're not comfortable things, but just recognizing them, seeing the trials that other people go through. We're all going to go through trials. We're all going to have troubles. We're all going to, have things that we fear or that we need to fight for, as we read stories or reread history or whatever we're doing, but just to realize how lucky we are, but at the same time, recognize that we have to preserve that. And that's something that we take for granted, but we need to make sure that we're holding on to that and that we're fighting for that in our lives as well.
I love that. Yeah, I think that really is the most important takeaway from the book and from your message, from the stories of the lives of those people that are really based on real people, based on so many people, 80,000 people
80,000,
valued freedom enough to just move and get in a little fishing boat. And that's how valuable freedom is.
And to leave everything. I mean, they left everything behind, and including family.
Yeah. Sometimes I think it's a little unimaginable, but for those of us that have had freedom in our lives, we haven't been able to comprehend just what we might have to give for it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has just been great to talk to you. Love your book. I hope that people will read it and take all those things away from it that you have put into it.